The darkness at 3:47 a.m. felt heavier than usual. Garrett Sullivan sat hunched over a laptop held together with duct tape and stubborn hope, the battery icon blinking its final warning at 4%. The email from First National Bank glowed accusatory on the cracked screen. Account balance, minus $73, overdraft fee, $35, will be assessed at 6 a.m. $28 in cash sat on the table beside him, 4 worn bills and some change that wouldn't buy dignity, but might buy gas. The electricity bill, $340, 2 months overdue, lay buried under a stack of final notices he'd stopped opening 3 weeks ago. The eviction notice taped to their apartment door gave them 72 hours. Less now. 69 hours and change. Behind him, Emma slept on the pull-out sofa, a threadbare blanket pulled to her chin. 9 years old, and she already knew not to ask for lights after dark. Knew tonight's dinner had been instant ramen for the 6th time this week. Knew to check the refrigerator before asking what they'd eat tomorrow, because the answer lived in that empty white box with its broken light and sad condiment collection. Garrett clicked through 10 browser tabs, each one a job application portal stamped with the same soul-crushing phrase: position filled. His degree in geological engineering, 8 years of expertise reading rock formations, assessing structural integrity, calculating load-bearing tolerances, meant exactly nothing after the Silver Point mine collapse. Didn't matter that he'd warned them about the instability. Didn't matter that his reports had been ignored. 3 men died when the supports failed, and somehow Garrett's name became synonymous with the disaster instead of the company that cut corners to save money. No one in the industry would touch him now. He rubbed his eyes, felt the grit of exhaustion and failure. The cursor blinked on a search for cheap storage units. They'd need somewhere to put their belongings after the eviction. Except they couldn't afford storage either. Couldn't afford anything except maybe 1 tank of gas if he was careful. The search results loaded, but one link caught his eye. Not storage. Federal Asset Disposition Office. Government Surplus Auctions. Curiosity more than hope made him click. The page looked like it hadn't been updated since 1995. Blocky text, no images. Just endless lists of surplus government properties sold to the highest bidder. Most of it garbage, office furniture from closed federal buildings, obsolete computer equipment, vehicles that probably hadn't run since the first Bush administration. Garrett scrolled, not sure what he was looking for. Maybe scrap metal he could resell. Maybe equipment he could flip on Craigslist. Maybe just a reason to keep his mind occupied for another few minutes before accepting that he'd failed his daughter so completely there was no coming back. Then he saw it. Lot number 847-D. Decommissioned military installation. Location, 94 miles northwest of Reno, Nevada. Description: underground military facility, approximately 12,000 square feet. Constructed 1951. Decommissioned 1969. Property sold as is. Minimum bid $1.00. Condition: sold as is. Where is? The red text below made his stomach clench. Warning: structure has not been inspected since 1987. May contain hazardous materials. Structural integrity not guaranteed. The United States government disclaims all liability. Purchaser assumes all risk. $1. Garrett stared at the screen, his engineer's brain already working. Underground facility built in 1951, right after the Soviets tested their first atomic bomb. Northwest of Reno, in the middle of nowhere. Had to be a Cold War bunker. One of those fallout shelters they'd built by the dozens, convinced nuclear war was inevitable. Most had been decommissioned in the early 70s when the panic faded and budget realities hit. Contents salvaged, structures sealed, Land sold off or simply forgotten. But what if they'd left equipment behind? Ventilation systems used industrial copper. Backup generators contained recyclable metals. Even old electrical wiring had scrap value. A 12,000 square foot facility might have enough salvageable material to net a few $1,000s, maybe more. Enough to pay rent. Enough to buy time. His cursor hovered over the listing. The satellite image loaded slowly, his internet connection crawling on borrowed Wi-Fi from the neighbor's unsecured network. Gray concrete emerging from scrubland like a tombstone. Chain link fence, partially collapsed. Warning signs still visible from space after 55 years. Garrett pulled up geological surveys of the area from the USGS database. Still had access from his old job. Login credentials they'd forgotten to revoke. The data loaded in layers. Bedrock stable. No major fault lines. Extinct volcanic system nearby, dormant for at least 10 millennia. If they'd built in 1951, following Corps of Engineers standards for nuclear-hardened structures, the integrity should still be solid. 3-foot-thick reinforced concrete walls, designed to last a century minimum. Unless you got a direct hit from a thermonuclear warhead, the structure would survive just about anything. Which meant the equipment inside might too. The battery warning flashed again. 2%. Garrett's hand shook as he navigated to the bidding page. Account balance, $28.73. Minimum bid, $1. Processing fee, $0. He looked back at Emma. Her small form barely made a dent in the sagging sofa. She'd worn the same winter coat for 3 years, the zipper broken so badly he'd resorted to safety pins. She'd stopped asking for new books, content to reread the same library copies until she could recite passages from memory. She never complained when dinner was ramen again. Never asked why they had to move so often. Never asked why Mommy lived in California now with her new husband and their new baby, while Emma slept on a broken sofa in an apartment with no electricity. She just smiled that brave little smile and said everything would be okay because Daddy was smart and Daddy would figure it out. Except Daddy hadn't figured out anything except new and creative ways to fail. Garrett's fingers moved before his brain could override them. Entered the credit card number, maxed out but not expired for another month. Selected the property. Entered his bid. $1. Clicked the confirmation checkbox without reading the liability waiver, because what did he have to lose that hadn't already been taken? The confirmation screen loaded. Your bid of $1 for lot number 847-D has been recorded. Auction closes in 72 hours. You will be notified of results via email. The laptop battery died. Screen went black. Garrett sat in the darkness and wondered if he'd just made the stupidest decision of his life, or the first smart one in 3 years. Behind him, Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about stars and spaceships and going home. Garrett closed his eyes and prayed to a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore that this one desperate gamble might actually mean something. 72 hours became 71, then 60, then 48. The eviction deadline ticked closer. Garrett picked up a day labor job moving furniture for a real estate company, cash under the table. 9 hours of his back screaming for the grand sum of $60. Bought ramen and peanut butter. Paid nothing toward rent because what was the point? The landlord had already filed the paperwork. The email arrived at 6:23 a.m. on the 3rd day. Section. Auction results. Lot number 847-D. Bid accepted. Garrett's hands shook so badly he could barely click open the message. Congratulations. Your bid of $1 for property ID lot number 847-D, site Delta 9, has been accepted. No other bids were received. Please remit payment and collect documentation at the Federal Asset Disposition Office, 2847 Industrial Parkway, Carson City, Nevada, within 14 days, or your claim will be forfeit. Attached: safety inspection reports, property survey, liability waiver. He'd won, with $1, because no one else had been stupid enough or desperate enough to bid on a condemned bunker in the middle of nowhere. The attachment loaded slowly. Final_safety_inspection_1987.pdf. 37 years old, scanned from fading typewritten pages. Site Delta 9. Final Structural Assessment, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Date: November 12, 1987. Findings: low-level background radiation detected in Corridor B, 0.3 millisieverts per year, within OSHA safe limits. Minor cracking observed in eastern wall section. Width less than 2 millimeters, non-structural. Electrical systems completely non-functional. Interior temperature stable at 58 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Conclusion: occupancy not recommended. Facility should be permanently sealed and marked as structurally hazardous. Recommendation: demolition and site remediation estimated at $340,000. Given limited strategic value and budget constraints, recommend transfer to surplus asset disposition. Radiation. The word made Garrett's stomach turn, but the numbers told a different story. 0.3 millisieverts per year was the natural background radiation in half of Colorado. Granite buildings, airplane flights, even bananas had measurable radiation. Not dangerous unless you plan to live there for decades. The ventilation motors being seized actually made sense. 40 years of sitting idle in desert humidity would corrode anything mechanical. But the concrete structure itself, stable temperature, minimal cracking, that suggested integrity. The bones were good even if the organs had failed. He could work with that. Emma appeared in the doorway, backpack already on, ready for school. Her hair needed cutting, but there was no money for that either. She'd started doing it herself in the bathroom mirror, uneven bangs she tried to hide. Her eyes found his. Those eyes that had seen too much for 9 years. Eyes that had watched her parents scream at each other about money, watched the furniture get repossessed, watched her father crumble piece by piece under the weight of circumstances he couldn't control. She didn't ask what he was looking at, just waited. The words came out before he could stop them. "We bought something." Emma's expression didn't change. "Bought what?" "A storage facility, sort of. Out in the desert." "What kind of storage facility?" "An old one, from a long time ago." The silence stretched. Then, so quiet he almost didn't hear. "Is it dangerous?" Garrett looked at his daughter, really looked at her. The coat with the broken zipper he'd promised to replace 6 months ago. The shoes getting too small, but they'd have to last another few months. The expression on her face that said she'd heard promises before and watched them dissolve like sugar in rain. He wanted to lie. Wanted to say everything would be fine because Dad was smart, Dad had checked, Dad knew what he was doing. Instead, he said, "I don't know yet, but I'll check it out first. Make sure it's safe before you see it." Emma nodded. She'd heard that before, too. Dad promising to check, to verify, to make sure. Right before taking the job at Silver Point that ended his career. Right before marrying Mom, which ended in lawyers and custody battles. Right before buying that house they couldn't afford, which ended in foreclosure. Maybe his checking didn't mean much. "I need to get to school," Emma said. "Mrs. Patterson doesn't like it when I'm late." She left without another word. pulling the door closed with a soft click that sounded like disappointment. Garrett sat alone in the silent apartment and wondered if he was chasing salvation or just accelerating their collapse. The Federal Asset Disposition Office occupied a narrow storefront in a dying strip mall, wedged between a dry cleaner that smelled like chemicals and a tax preparation service that had gone out of business sometime during the Clinton administration. The windows were dusty. The sign was faded. The whole place radiated bureaucratic indifference. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered over linoleum that might have been white in 1987. A woman sat behind a desk that had probably been surplus from some other surplus sale. Her attention focused on a crossword puzzle. She didn't look up when Garrett entered. He stood at the counter for a full minute before clearing his throat. The woman, maybe 50, blonde hair showing gray roots, nails painted a chipped red, glanced up with the expression of someone profoundly inconvenienced by the concept of customers. "Help you? I'm here to finalize the purchase of Lot 847-D, Site Delta 9. That got her attention. She set down her pencil and really looked at him, taking in the worn clothes, the unshaven face, the desperate edge that probably radiated off him like heat shimmer. "You're the one who bid on the bunker?" "Yes, ma'am." She pulled a file from a cabinet, an actual physical file, manila folder stuffed with papers that looked older than Garrett. Thumbed through them. "Need you to sign everywhere there's a yellow tab. Initial the red ones. That'll be $1. Garrett placed 4 quarters on the counter. The woman swept them into a drawer without counting, stamped several documents with enough force to make the desk shake, then slid everything into a slim manila envelope. "Deeds in there. Property survey too. Last safety inspection from '87. Take that for what it's worth. Keys are in there as well, though Lord knows if the locks still work after all this time." She started to turn back to her crossword, then paused. "Anyone else bid on this property?" "You mean besides me?" "Besides you." Garrett shook his head. The woman's expression shifted slightly. Not quite sympathy, more like the look you'd give someone who just bought a ticket on the Titanic. "Listen," she said, voice lower. "I've worked this desk 20 years. Seen a lot of folks buy a lot of surplus thinking they got a deal. Most of the time, they just bought themselves a problem." She tapped the envelope. "That facility out there? That's the kind of problem that can hurt you. Structurally, legally, financially. You sure you want to go through with this?" "I already won the bid." "You can walk away. Just don't pick up the deed. Lot gets relisted, you're out $1. Better than being out a lot more." Garrett looked at the envelope, looked at the woman, thought about the eviction notice, about Emma's coat, about the $27.73 in his pocket, which was every cent he owned in the world. "I don't have the luxury of walking away from anything." Something flickered in the woman's eyes. Not pity exactly. Recognition, maybe. Like she'd been there once, staring at bad options and picking the least terrible. "Then good luck. You're going to need it." Garrett took the envelope and left. In the car, his 2008 Honda Civic with 190,000 miles, a duct-taped passenger window, and an engine that made concerning noises at startup, he examined the contents. The deed was real. Official seals, signatures, the whole bureaucratic apparatus of legal ownership. 12,000 square feet of underground space. Lot number 847-D, coordinates provided. Sold to Garrett Sullivan for $1 plus applicable fees. None. Property transferred as is with no warranties express or implied. He owned it. Actually owned something for the first time in 3 years. The survey showed the basic layout. Single entrance, main shaft descending 50 feet, multiple corridors branching from central hub. Rooms labeled with military designations, D901, D902, continuing through D915. No details on contents. No floor plans beyond basic structure. The keys were simple, 3 of them on a metal ring with a faded tag reading Site Delta 9, Primary Access, in block letters that had probably been typed on a manual typewriter. But there was something else in the envelope, something not listed on the official inventory. A small notebook. Leather cover worn soft with age and handling, pages yellowed but intact. The first page bore a single line in faded fountain pen. Property of R.B., Site Delta 9, Guardian Log. Garrett's pulse kicked up. He flipped to the first entry. August 14th, 1951. Initial repository establishment complete. 847 standard Federal Reserve gold ingots secured. Total value, $29,645,000. May God protect us from ever needing to access this. The words hit him like a physical blow. Gold. Not equipment, not salvage. Gold. His hands shook as he continued reading. May 1969. Facility decommissioned per Defense Appropriation Act. Contents scheduled for retrieval and transfer to Fort Knox. Transport timeline delayed due to administrative complications. June 1969. Transport order canceled. Facility reclassified to inactive pending review status. Contents ordered to remain in place pending further evaluation. July 1969. Facility officially sealed. All personnel reassigned. Files closed. Then the handwriting changed. Different pen, different hand. Same notebook. August 1969. Someone needs to watch it. They forgot. I didn't. I'll keep the secret. And from there, month after month, year after year, the same simple entries. Vault secure. Secret kept. Garrett flipped forward, watching decades scroll past in brief notations. The handwriting aged, shakier in later years, but consistent. The same person. 54 years of entries. The final entry stopped his breathing. March 1st, 2024. Cancer won't wait any longer. 54 years guarding what the government forgot. The auction will find someone. Someone who needs this more than they need to keep covering their mistake. The combination is what everyone forgets. The year we promised never again. The day freedom died. The month we learned what fear really means. To whoever finds this, I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to make this right while I was alive. Maybe you will. R.B. 8 days ago. Whoever had written this had died 8 days ago, right before the auction listing went live. Had deliberately put this notebook in the paperwork so whoever bought the property would find it, would know. Garrett's brain spun through the math automatically. 847 gold ingots. Federal Reserve standard was 400 troy ounces per bar. Current gold price around $2,040 per ounce. 847 times 400 times $2,040 equals $691,152,000. $691 million. The notebook slipped from his numb fingers onto the passenger seat. He sat frozen, trying to process. They'd forgotten it. Actually forgotten nearly $700 million in gold sitting in a bunker in the Nevada desert for 55 years. And this person, R.B., had watched it the entire time, kept it secret, maintained it, waited for what? For someone desperate enough to bid $1 on a condemned bunker? for someone who needed it more than the government needed to keep hiding their catastrophic screw-up. The car suddenly felt too small. Garrett shoved open the door, stumbled out, bent over with hands on knees as his vision tunneled and his breath came in gasps that had nothing to do with the desert heat. This couldn't be real. Had to be some kind of joke, some elaborate scam. People didn't just forget $700 million. Governments didn't lose track of that much gold. Except apparently they did. He forced himself upright, forced air into his lungs, tried to think rationally. If the gold was really there, and that was a massive if, then other people would know about it, would be looking for it. The kind of people who made a career out of finding lost valuables. Professional treasure hunters, criminal organizations, maybe even foreign governments. And Garrett had just put his name on the deed. He looked at the coordinates on the survey. 94 miles northwest of Reno, middle of absolutely nowhere. If he left now, he could be there before dark. Could verify, could see if any of this insanity was real, or if he'd just bought the most expensive dollar's worth of disappointment in history. The smart move would be to walk away. Forget the bunker, forget the notebook, forget all of it. But smart moves were for people who had options. Garrett had 67 hours until eviction, and $27 in his pocket. Smart had stopped being available about 3 years and 1 mine collapse ago. He got back in the car, put the address into his phone's GPS, and started driving toward either salvation or the final proof that he really was as big a failure as everyone said. The road from Carson City to the middle of nowhere took 2.5 hours on progressively deteriorating pavement. Highway became county road, became dirt track, became something that might charitably be called tire ruts if you were feeling generous. The last 5 miles scraped the undercarriage of the Civic with sounds that made Garrett wince and pray the oil pan didn't crack. One mechanical failure out here, and they'd be walking back in 100-degree heat with no water and no cell signal. But the car held. Barely. Protesting every bump, but moving forward. Then he saw it. The bunker entrance rose from the scrubland exactly like the satellite image. A massive concrete structure, weathered gray, covered in decades of graffiti. You are here. The end is near. Sarah loves Mike. 1987. Layer upon layer of spray paint and marker scrawls. The archaeological record of trespassers who'd found this place and left their mark before moving on. The chain-link fence had collapsed in sections, metal posts leaning at drunken angles. Warning signs dangled from rusty bolts, sun-faded but still legible. U.S. government property, no trespassing, authorized personnel only. Someone had spray-painted over that last one. Authorized by who? Government forgot this place. The entrance itself was a vault door. Genuine bank vault construction, 10 feet tall, 8 feet wide, steel thick enough to stop anything short of a direct artillery hit. Designed by people who believed the end of the world was a question of when, not if. A padlock the size of Garrett's fist secured the door. The metal had weathered, but showed no signs of tampering. Either no one had tried to break in, or the lock was too solid for casual vandals. Garrett retrieved the keys from the envelope with shaking hands. The largest key slid into the padlock mechanism. It turned. Smoothly. Too smoothly for something that had supposedly been locked since 1969. Someone had maintained this. Recently. The Mystery Guardian, RB, must have kept it functional all these years. The padlock fell away, heavy in Garrett's palm. He gripped the wheel-like handle and turned. Metal groaned. Mechanisms inside the door clicked and clanked like the workings of some massive clock. Then, with a pneumatic hiss that made his heart jump, the door swung inward. Cool air rushed out, carrying the smell of concrete and metal and something else. Something that wasn't quite the scent of total abandonment. It smelled maintained, preserved, like someone had been here recently enough to matter. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around. Call the police, call the FBI, call someone with authority and guns and backup plans. But he'd bought this property legally, owned it. And if the notebook was even partially true, walking away meant walking away from the only chance he'd ever have to actually fix things. Garrett pulled out the cheap LED flashlight he'd grabbed from the glove compartment, $5 hardware store special that barely cut through darkness, and stepped inside. The stairs descended into absolute blackness. Concrete walls surprisingly clean, metal railings showing only surface rust. Overhead, pipes and electrical conduits ran in neat parallel lines, all carefully organized according to some long-forgotten military standard. Garrett counted steps. 20, 30, 40. The temperature dropped with each one, going from desert heat to comfortable cool to almost cold. His breath misted in the flashlight beam. 50 steps down, maybe 50 feet underground. The stairs ended at a corridor stretching into darkness in both directions. The hallway was wide enough for 3 people to walk abreast. Doors on both sides, spaced every 20 feet or so. Each one had a number stenciled in military fashion. D901, D902, D903. Garrett tried the first door. Locked. The second, also locked. The third wasn't locked. Someone had deliberately propped it open with a rubber doorstop wedged under the bottom edge. RB left this one open. Wanted it found. Garrett pushed the door fully open and swept his flashlight across the space beyond. The room was enormous. 40 feet square at least, filled floor to ceiling with metal shelving units. And on those shelves, covered in dust but otherwise pristine, were supplies. Canned goods, boxes of dried food, water containers, medical supplies. All organized with military precision, labels facing outward, everything in perfect rows. Garrett approached the nearest shelf in a daze. The cans were old, labels faded to pastels, designs from an era before UPC codes, but still readable. Beans, corn, peaches, dates stamped on top. March 1968, April 1968, July 1968. Someone had stocked this bunker to survive the apocalypse, had filled it with enough supplies to keep people alive for months, maybe years, then sealed it up and walked away, leaving everything exactly as it was. He moved through the room, flashlight revealing more and more. A hand-crank radio still in its original box. Batteries, dozens of packages, probably dead after half a century, but still neatly stacked. Blankets sealed in vacuum-packed plastic. A medical kit that looked like it could outfit a small field hospital. But it was what he found on the desk in the corner that made his breath stop. A ledger, open, with fresh handwriting, not from 1968, from last week. He read the most recent entry, his flashlight beam steady despite his shaking hands. Final inspection complete. All systems operational. Vault seals intact. Air filtration functioning on backup power. Emergency generators tested and responsive. The burden passes forward now. May the finder have the courage I lacked. RB, March 1st, 2024. The day the Guardian died. Garrett turned pages backward, entries going back months, Years, decades, all in the same careful handwriting. Different pens, different paper sometimes, but always the same message. Vault secure. Systems operational. Secret maintained. 54 years of entries. 54 years of one person checking, maintaining, protecting something the government had forgotten existed. Protecting it for what? For who? Then he heard it. A voice. Clear and young and coming from deeper in the bunker. Emma, his daughter who should have been at school, who he'd left at the apartment, who had no way to get here, was somewhere in this bunker, and her voice echoed down the corridor, saying words that turned his blood to ice. Dad, there's another door back here. A really big one. Garrett spun, flashlight beam cutting wild arcs through the darkness. Emma? Emma, where are you? In here, at the back of the room. He ran, nearly tripping over supply crates, flashlight swinging. Found her at the far end of the storage room, standing in front of something he'd missed in the shadows. Not just a door. A vault door. Circular. Massive. Like something from a bank or a fortress, with a combination dial at the center and enormous locking bolts around its circumference. And standing next to his daughter was a man. Tall. Late 60s or early 70s. Weathered face, sun-darkened skin, hands that looked like they'd spent a lifetime working with tools and wood and metal. Wearing work clothes, jeans, flannel shirt, boots with oil stains, a battered cowboy hat. The man held up both hands, showing they were empty. His voice was calm, steady. The voice of someone who'd expected this moment for a very long time. I'm not here to hurt anyone. Name's Walter Bridger. Most folks call me Walt. I live about 5 miles east, been out here 42 years. Saw your car from my place, figured I'd better come check before you went somewhere you maybe shouldn't. Garrett moved between the stranger and Emma, heart hammering. How did my daughter get here? Walked, I'd imagine. Found her outside maybe 10 minutes ago, said she skipped school to find you. Told me her dad was checking out the old bunker. Walt's expression was patient, understanding. Figured you were down here. Been waiting for someone to show up since the auction went live last week. You know about... Garrett couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't want to say the words out loud where Emma could hear. Gold. Vault. Secret. Walt's eyes, pale blue, sharp despite his age, moved to the notebook visible in Garrett's pocket. My father left that for you. Randall Bridger. He passed 8 days ago. Cancer finally won. The old man's voice stayed level, but something in it cracked around the edges. He spent 54 years taking care of this place, waiting for the right person to come along, someone who needed it more than the folks who forgot about it. The vault door loomed behind him, massive and implacable, and suddenly terrifying. Because if what the notebook said was true, if even 10% of it was true, then standing in front of it was the most dangerous thing Garrett had ever done. And he'd brought his daughter. Walt's ranch house sat low against the horizon, weathered wood that had survived 4 decades of Nevada heat and winter cold. Inside smelled like coffee and sawdust, and the particular quiet of a man who'd lived alone for a long time. Photographs lined one wall. A young soldier in Korean War uniform staring at the camera with the serious expression of someone who'd seen things they couldn't unsee. Randall Bridger in 1951, before Site Delta 9 consumed the rest of his life. Emma sat on a worn sofa, still in her school clothes, expression carefully neutral, the way children learned when adults were discussing things they weren't supposed to hear. She'd hitchhiked, Actually put out her thumb on Highway 50 and gotten a ride from a trucker who dropped her at the nearest crossroads. 9 years old and desperate enough to climb into a stranger's vehicle because she'd overheard Garrett on the phone with the Asset Disposition Office and knew he was planning to check the bunker alone. Garrett couldn't decide whether to hug her or ground her for the rest of her natural life. Settled for neither, just kept her close while Walt talked. The old man poured coffee from a percolator that looked older than Garrett, then pulled out a folder thick with papers gone brown at the edges. Official documents. Army Corps of Engineers stamps. Classified markings partially redacted with thick black marker. My father was assigned to Delta 9 in July 1969, right after they officially decommissioned it. Walt spread the documents across the kitchen table. He was supposed to be temporary security. They told him a transport team would arrive within 60 days to retrieve the contents and relocate them to Fort Knox. Standard protocol for closing these facilities. Garrett's throat felt tight. They never came. They never came. Walt's finger traced a line of text in one document, a memo dated August 1969. Dad reported the delay up the chain. Got told they were working on it. Reported again in 1970, same response. 1975. 1980. Every time, someone assured him it was being handled. The memo showed multiple stamps. Received, filed, pending review. The bureaucratic equivalent of a black hole where urgent matters went to die. Eventually, he realized they weren't delaying. They were burying. Walt looked up, pale eyes hard. You have to understand what happened in '69. Nixon took us off the gold standard that August. Massive currency crisis. Budget cuts across the board. Suddenly, the government had to explain where every dollar went, justify every program. Admitting they'd forgotten about $691 million in gold sitting in the desert? He shook his head. Easier to classify the whole thing at a higher level and pretend it never existed. Emma's small voice cut through the heaviness. But they couldn't just forget about that much money. Someone would remember. Someone would check. Walt smiled at her, sad and proud at once. You'd think so. But that's not how bureaucracy works. The people who ordered the gold stored there in 1951 were retired or dead by 1969. The people who were supposed to retrieve it in '69 got reassigned when budgets changed. The records got classified, then classified higher, then buried so deep that even looking for them would require clearances most people don't have. He tapped the folder. My father kept his own records. Knew someday someone might need proof. Garrett picked up one document, a requisition form for Site Delta 9 dated March 1951. Listed contents: 847 Standard Federal Reserve gold ingots, 400 troy ounces each. Total value, $29,645,000. Another document showed the partial transfer in 1968. 200 ingots relocated to Fort Knox per Executive Order 11,825. Simple subtraction left 647 ingots. 647 bars of gold, each weighing 25 pounds, currently valued at over $690 million. His hands started shaking again. Walt reached across the table and gripped his wrist, firm and grounding. Listen to me carefully. What you're feeling right now, the disbelief, the fear, the sense that this can't be real, that's normal. My father felt it for 54 years. Walt's voice stayed level, controlled. But you need to understand something else. You're not the only one who knows about Delta 9. Ice water down Garrett's spine. Who else? Walt released his wrist and pulled out a different folder. This one contained photographs, surveillance shots taken with a telephoto lens. 5 men standing around a vehicle with high-end ground-penetrating radar equipment. Military-grade metal detectors. The kind of gear professional treasure hunters used, not hobbyists. Man on the left is Viktor Novak, former Soviet military engineer, immigrated in 1991, now runs a private recovery firm out of Las Vegas. Specializes in locating Cold War installations and salvaging whatever got left behind. Walt pointed to each man in turn. He's been searching for the Delta sites for 15 years. Has a whole network. Satellite analysts, document forgers, people inside the bureaucracy feeding him information about decommissioned facilities. Garrett studied the photos. Novak was maybe mid-40s, built like someone who spent time in gyms, with the kind of face that would disappear in a crowd until you looked at the eyes. Those were predator's eyes. Calculator eyes. How long has he been looking for Delta 9 specifically? At least 5 years that I know of. He's come within 10 miles twice. Both times my father redirected him, planted false survey data, filed noise complaints that got sheriff's patrols increased in the area. Once even started a small brush fire that shut down access roads for 3 weeks. Walt's expression hardened. But Novak's not the real problem. He's just the contractor. Contractor for who? I don't have proof, just suspicion based on connections my father noticed over the years. But we think Novak's working for Senator Preston Holloway. The name hit Garrett like a physical blow. Preston Holloway, chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, third-term senator from Arizona, regular fixture on Sunday morning political shows talking about fiscal responsibility and government waste. Worth at least $50 million personally, more through his wife's family money. One of the most powerful people in Washington. Why would a senator need to hire treasure hunters? He could just request the information through official channels. Walt's laugh was bitter. And draw attention to the fact that Delta 9 exists? That the government lost track of almost $700 million in gold? Holloway spent 20 years building a reputation as Mr. Fiscal Hawk. Finding out he's been covering up one of the biggest accounting failures in federal history would end his career. He leaned forward. No, he needs it found quietly. Needs someone like Novak to locate it and retrieve it off books. Then Holloway can arrange an anonymous donation to the Treasury, collect political favors for recovering stolen assets, and no one ever knows the government screwed up in the first place. Emma had gone very still, the way children did when processing things too big for their age. Her voice came out small. So if we try to keep the gold, this senator will try to stop us? Not just try, sweetheart. Walt's expression softened, looking at her, but his words stayed hard. He'll throw everything he's got at making sure your father never sees a dime. Legal challenges, IRS audits, criminal investigations. He's got the power to make your lives a special kind of hell. Garrett stood abruptly, chair scraping loud against the floor, walked to the window, and stared out at the desert stretching to the horizon. Behind him, Emma's breathing had gone quick and shallow, the way it did when she was trying not to cry. Everything they'd been through seemed to compress into this single moment. A choice between walking away with nothing or fighting people who had resources and power and the kind of ruthlessness that came from never having to face real consequences. His reflection in the window glass looked haggard, defeated before the fight even started. Then Walt spoke again, quieter now. My father watched that gold for 54 years. Maintained the systems, kept the secret. You know what he told me the week before he died? A pause. He said the people who forgot about it didn't deserve to get it back. Said whoever was desperate enough to bid on a condemned bunker probably needed it more than bureaucrats needed to cover their asses. Garrett turned back. So he wanted this to happen? He wanted someone to finally make them accountable. Someone who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Walt met his eyes. That sound like anyone you know? The weight of it settled on Garrett's shoulders like a physical thing. A dead man's last wish delivered through his son. A chance to fight back against a system that had ground Garrett down until there was almost nothing left. A ridiculous, impossible, probably going to fail attempt to make something right in a world that seemed designed to reward the wrong people. He looked at Emma. She was watching him with those two old eyes, waiting to see what he'd choose. Run or fight. Give up or stand. The words came out steadier than he felt. I need to see it. The vault. Need to verify this is real before I make any decisions. Walt nodded slowly. Then we go now, before Novak realizes the auction closed, before word spreads that someone actually bought Delta 9. He stood, grabbed a heavy mag light from the counter and a toolbox from the mudroom. But you need to understand, the second we open that vault, everything changes. You can't unring that bell. Garrett thought about the eviction notice still taped to his door, about having exactly $27 to his name, about Emma's future stretching ahead like a minefield. Everything's already changed. We just haven't caught up yet. The three of them descended into the bunker together, Walt leading with the industrial flashlight casting hard shadows on concrete walls. The storage room looked different now, less abandoned, more like a time capsule deliberately preserved. Walt moved through it with familiarity, checking gauges on equipment Garrett hadn't noticed before. Air filtration monitors, humidity sensors, a backup generator panel showing green lights that meant something down here still had power. Dad installed solar panels on the surface in 1987, Walt explained, flipping switches that brought corridor lights humming to life. Fluorescent tubes flickered and caught, washing everything in cold white light. Ran cables down through ventilation shafts, enough to keep critical systems operational, air circulation, emergency power, monitoring equipment. The bunker transformed under the lights, not abandoned at all, actively maintained by a ghost who died 8 days ago, but whose presence saturated every surface. Emma walked close to Garrett, one hand gripping his jacket. She'd gone quiet the way she did when processing fear, internalizing it because showing weakness meant acknowledging vulnerability neither of them could afford. The vault door dominated the back wall, 3 feet thick steel and concrete composite, circular, with a wheel lock mechanism at its center and 8 massive bolts arranged around the circumference. Inscribed in the metal above the door in letters 6 inches high, Federal Reserve Emergency Deporized Access Only, established 1951. Walt ran his hand over the inscription with something close to reverence. There were 12 of these built between 1951 and 1953, distributed across the country in case the Soviets actually launched. The idea was to preserve enough wealth to rebuild after nuclear war. Most got decommissioned when détente started looking possible. This one was supposed to close in '69, but he trailed off, the rest obvious. Garrett pulled out the notebook, found the cryptic message on the final page. The combination is what everyone forgets. The year we promised never again. The day freedom died. The month we learned what fear really means. Walt watched him work through it. Dad told me the answer years ago. Wanted someone to know in case he died before this got resolved. August 6th, 1945. Garrett's voice came out rough. Hiroshima. The year we promised it would never happen again. The day that kind of freedom, the freedom to live without fear of instant annihilation, died for an entire generation. The month the world learned what real fear looked like. Walt gestured to the dial. 8/6/1945. Right, left, right, left. Garrett's hands found the combination wheel. Cold metal smooth under his fingers. He dialed slowly, precisely. Right to 8. Left to 6. Right to 19. Left to 45. Something deep inside the vault mechanism clicked. Heavy. Final. The wheel turned. The bolts retracted with mechanical precision, each one sliding back with a solid chunk of metal on metal. Then the entire door shifted outward an inch, breaking the seal that had held for who knew how long. Walt and Garrett both grabbed the wheel and pulled. The door swung outward on hinges engineered to last a century, revealing darkness beyond. Cool air rushed out, carrying the scent of metal and stone and time compressed into decades. Walt's flashlight cut into the space. The beam caught something and reflected back in a warm yellow glow that seemed to fill the vault with liquid light. Gold, stacked on reinforced shelving units in neat rows. Bars stamped with U.S. Federal Reserve and serial numbers, each one roughly 2 feet long, 4 inches wide, 3 inches deep. 25 pounds of elemental wealth that humans had killed each other over since civilization began. Garrett's legs went weak. He sat down hard on the vault threshold, unable to process what his eyes reported. Emma stepped forward slowly, almost in a trance, and touched one of the bars. Her small hand looked impossibly tiny against it. "Is this real?" Walt moved to a laminated inventory sheet mounted on the interior wall. Site Delta 9 Emergency Reserve Depository. Established 1951. Purpose: preservation of federal monetary reserves in event of catastrophic national emergency. He read down the list. Original deposit, 847 standard ingots. Partial transfer, 1968, 200 ingots to Fort Knox. Remaining, 647 ingots. Current value. He'd written in pencil at the bottom, updating it periodically. As of February 2024, $691,152,000. $691 million. Sitting in a vault under property Garrett owned legally for $1. The absurdity of it crashed over him in waves. He started laughing, high and brittle and edged with hysteria. Laughed until tears ran down his face and his ribs hurt, and Emma was staring at him with worry creasing her forehead. Walt crouched beside him, gripped his shoulder. "Breathe. Just breathe. I know how this feels. Watched my father process it for half a century. I bought this for $1. The words came out strangled between laughs that were closer to sobs. "I have $27 in my pocket, and I own almost $700 million in gold. I can't pay rent, but I could buy the entire building. I can't afford my daughter's coat, but I could—" The sentence died because there was nowhere left to take. The gap between his reality and the vault's contents was too vast to bridge with words. Emma knelt beside him, wrapped her thin arms around his neck. "It's okay, Dad. We're going to be okay now." Except they weren't. Not yet. Because Walt was right. They couldn't unring this bell. The moment anyone else learned about this, the full weight of powerful people with powerful motives would crash down on them like an avalanche. Garrett forced himself to stand, to breathe, to think. "We need to document this. Photos, video, everything. Before we tell anyone, we need proof that this existed and what condition it was in when we found it." Walt nodded approval. "Smart. My truck has a video camera. I've been filming the wildlife surveys for the BLM. We can get everything on record." They spent the next hour documenting. Walt's camera captured every angle. The vault door, the inventory sheets, individual bars with their serial numbers visible, the maintained equipment, the logbooks showing Randall's 54 years of faithful service. Garrett used his phone for backup footage, knowing the battery wouldn't last but needing redundancy. The numbers became real in a way they hadn't been before. 647 bars at approximately $1.07 million each, stacked in rows of 20. 32 full rows plus 7 partial. The physical manifestation of wealth beyond anything Garrett had imagined possible. Then they heard it. Faint but distinct. Footsteps above them, multiple sets, and voices carrying down the stairwell. Walt killed the camera immediately, put a finger to his lips. They all froze. The voices grew clearer, male, professional, speaking in the clipped tones of people executing a planned operation. Doors unsealed. Someone's been here recently. Any vehicles? Civilian Honda parked outside. Nevada plates. Running the registration now. Carefully. We don't want this getting complicated. Walt's expression had gone cold and hard. He mouthed one word. Novak. Garrett's mind raced. They were 50 feet underground with one exit and armed professionals between them and freedom. Emma pressed against his side, trembling. The vault was still open behind them, almost $700 million in gold gleaming in the shadows. Walt moved fast for a man in his 70s, grabbed the camera, shoved it into Garrett's hands. Emergency exit at the end of the next corridor. Dad showed me years ago in case this ever happened. Goes up to the surface about 100 yards east. My truck's parked that direction. What about you? I'll hold them here. Give you time to get clear. Walt's eyes were steady, resolved. My father spent 54 years protecting this. I can spare a few minutes. Garrett wanted to argue, but Emma's fingers digging into his arm reminded him. She came first. Always. The voices were closer now, maybe halfway down the stairs. Maybe less. Walt hit a switch on the wall. Emergency lighting blazed throughout the bunker, red bulbs that turned everything into hellscape shadows. Simultaneously, a klaxon started blaring, the kind of sound designed to wake the dead or warn of incoming missiles. Steel doors throughout the facility began grinding closed on automatic systems that somehow still worked after 5 decades. Go! Walt shoved them toward the corridor. Second left, third door on the right, code is 0806. Move slow, but it opens. Garrett ran with Emma, the camera banging against his chest, Walt's voice behind them shouting something at the intruders about property rights and trespassing. The corridor lights cast crimson shadows. The klaxon made thinking nearly impossible. Doors were sealing section by section. Massive slabs of steel sliding from walls on tracks oiled by a dead man who'd known someday this might matter. Second left. Third door. Keypad glowing faintly. Garrett's fingers found the numbers. 0806. Hiroshima again. Everything in this place tied to that single moment of atomic fire. The door clicked. He pulled and it moved grudgingly, mechanisms groaning after years of disuse. Beyond was a tunnel, narrow, sloping upward. Emergency lighting strips along the floor activated as they entered, showing the way. Behind them, shouting. Walt's voice raised in anger, other voices responding with the flat authority of men used to being obeyed. Then a sound that might have been a scuffle. Emma pulled on Garrett's hand. We have to help him. We help him by getting clear. That's what he wanted. The words tasted like cowardice but felt like truth. If they got caught, Walt's sacrifice meant nothing. They climbed. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, rising at an angle steep enough to burn Garrett's thighs and leave Emma gasping. But she didn't complain, just kept moving with the grim determination of someone who'd learned early that life didn't care about being tired or scared. Finally, daylight. A sliver at first, then widening as another door opened onto scrubland. They emerged behind an outcropping of rocks that hid the exit from casual observation. Walt's truck sat 50 yards away, exactly where he'd said. Keys in the ignition. Because out here you either trusted your neighbors or you didn't survive. Garrett got Emma in the passenger seat, fired up the engine. It caught on the first try, reliable in the way only old Fords could be, and drove. Not fast enough to kick up dust that could be seen from a distance, but steady and purposeful toward the dirt road that would take them back to civilization. In the rearview mirror, the bunker entrance was invisible behind the rocks. But somewhere down there, Walt Bridger was buying them time with his freedom, or his safety, or maybe his life. Emma's voice was small and tight. Is Walt going to be okay? Garrett wanted to lie. Wanted to say, of course, he'll be fine, those men wouldn't dare hurt him. But Emma deserved better than false comfort. I don't know. But he's tough and smart, and he knew what he was doing. 5 miles down the road, Garrett's phone caught signal. 3 bars of LTE suddenly flooding in messages and alerts, and the return to a connected world. He pulled over, hands shaking too badly to drive safely. Dialed 911. The dispatcher sounded bored until Garrett said the words, I need to report a break-in and possible assault at a government facility. Site Delta 9, approximately 94 miles northwest of Reno. Property owner has been attacked by armed intruders. Suddenly, the dispatcher was very interested, very awake, asking for details and confirmation, and promising units were en route. Garrett gave them everything: location, description of the men from Walt's photos, the make and model of their vehicle. Didn't mention the gold. Didn't mention why anyone would care about a condemned bunker. Just said armed men had trespassed on his legally purchased property and assaulted the previous owner's son. The dispatcher kept him on the line, asking questions, filling dead air while officers drove toward the middle of nowhere to investigate something that probably sounded insane. Then a different voice came on, older, more authority. Mr. Sullivan, this is Sheriff Ramsey, Pershing County. I'm en route to the location you specified. I need you to tell me something. Have you been inside that facility? Yes, sir. It's my property. Purchased it legally 2 days ago. A long pause. You know what's in there? The question hung loaded and dangerous. Garrett chose his words carefully. I know there's historical equipment. I know someone's been maintaining it. And I know armed men just tried to take it from me. We'll secure the scene. I need you to meet me at the Lovelock substation in 1 hour. Bring all your documentation, deed, purchase records, everything. This is about to get very complicated very fast. The call ended. Garrett sat with the phone in his hand. Emma watching him with eyes that had seen too much today, and would probably see a lot more before this finished. Are we in trouble? Her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. Maybe. Probably. He reached over, squeezed her hand. But we're going to tell the truth and let that be enough. Emma nodded, but her expression said she'd learned enough about the world to know truth didn't always win against power and money and people who wanted things they couldn't have. Garrett started the truck and drove toward Lovelock, toward whatever came next, with a camera full of footage proving the impossible and a knot in his stomach that said the easy part was over. The hard part was about to begin. The Lovelock substation was a squat building that looked like it had been built during the same era as Delta 9 and maintained with roughly the same level of enthusiasm. Sheriff Ramsey was waiting when they pulled in, a man in his 60s with sun-weathered skin and the solid build of someone who'd spent a career handling situations that didn't fit in neat boxes. 3 other vehicles sat in the lot, 2 unmarked sedans with government plates, One SUV Garrett didn't recognize. Ramsey gestured them inside, expression neutral but eyes missing nothing. Emma clung to Garrett's side as they entered a conference room that smelled like burned coffee and institutional despair. 3 people already sat at the table. All wore suits that cost more than Garrett's car. All had the look of people who existed several levels above local law enforcement. The woman in the center stood. Mid-50s, silver-gray hair pulled back severely, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. Mr.
Sullivan, I'm Constance Whitmore, Deputy Director of Asset Recovery for the U.S. Treasury Department. This is Agent Marcus Lang, FBI, and this is Harold Finch, Legal Counsel for the Federal Reserve. They didn't shake hands, just studied him like he was a specimen under glass. Whitmore gestured to the empty chairs. Please sit. We have a lot to discuss. Garrett stayed standing. Is Walt Bridger okay? Mr. Bridger is currently being treated for minor injuries at Renown Regional Medical Center in Reno. He was assaulted by unknown assailants who fled before law enforcement arrived. He'll be fine. Whitmore's tone suggested this was a distraction from more important matters. Now, about Site Delta 9. I want to see him. Walt, I want confirmation he's actually okay before we discuss anything. Agent Lang spoke for the first time. Mr. Sullivan, I don't think you understand the gravity of this situation. What you found in that bunker is classified at the highest levels. The fact that you accessed it, filmed it, and removed evidence from the scene constitutes multiple federal violations. The implied threat hung in the air. Garrett felt Emma press closer against him. Sheriff Ramsey cleared his throat. With respect, Agent Lang, Mr. Sullivan purchased that property through a legal government auction. He had every right to access it and document what he found. And unless you're planning to arrest him, maybe we skip the intimidation and talk like civilized people. Whitmore shot Ramsey a look that could freeze fire, but she sat back down. Very well. Mr. Sullivan, are you aware of what you found in that vault? Gold. Federal Reserve gold that's been sitting there since 1951 because your department lost track of it. The room went very quiet. Finch, the Federal Reserve lawyer, folded his hands on the table. That's an oversimplification of a complex administrative situation. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the government forgot about $691 million in gold for 55 years. Then when someone finds it, you show up with threats instead of apologies. Whitmore's jaw tightened. The circumstances surrounding Site Delta 9 are classified, but I can tell you this. That gold was never abandoned. It was strategically positioned as part of a continuity of government program. The fact that retrieval was delayed doesn't negate federal ownership. Garrett pulled out his phone, brought up the photos he'd taken. This is Randall Bridger's maintenance log. 54 years of monthly entries. Everyone says the same thing. He reported the facility to his chain of command. Every time he was told it was being handled. Every time, nothing happened. He set the phone on the table. That's not strategic positioning. That's bureaucratic failure so massive you spent half a century covering it up. Lang leaned forward. You need to be very careful about what you're accusing. I'm not accusing anything. I'm stating facts. Facts I can prove. Facts that are going to come out whether you like it or not, because I'm not signing any confidentiality agreements, and I'm not walking away from property I legally own. The federal officials exchanged glances. Whitmore's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered behind her eyes. Calculation. Reassessment. She opened her briefcase, pulled out a folder. We're prepared to make you an offer.
$50 million, cash, tax-free, in exchange for the gold and your signature on a non-disclosure agreement. You walk away wealthy, and this matter stays classified. 50 million. The number echoed in Garrett's head. More money than he'd earn in 10 lifetimes. Enough to solve every problem, erase every worry, guarantee Emma's future through college and beyond. Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Dad?" He looked down at her. 9 years old. Smart enough to know 50 million was life-changing money. Also smart enough to recognize when people were trying to cheat them. Garrett turned back to Whitmore. "That's less than 8% of what it's worth. It's considerably more than you had yesterday."
And it comes without the legal complications of trying to claim government property as your own.
"It's not government property. You sold it to me. Everything on that land belongs to me under federal abandoned property law." Finch spoke up, voice dry as old paper. "That law contains exceptions for items of national security interest, which you'd have to prove in court, which means admitting publicly that you lost track of the gold in the first place.
Which means answering questions about what else you've lost. Which means congressional hearings and investigations, and all the things I'm guessing you'd really rather avoid." Garrett leaned forward. "So here's my counteroffer. I keep the gold. You provide security and logistical support for its safe retrieval and sale. We split it 60-40. 60% to me after taxes, 40% back to the Treasury. And no non-disclosure agreement." The silence that followed felt like a physical pressure. Whitmore's voice dropped 10 degrees. "You're making a serious mistake, Mr. Sullivan." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." Lang stood abruptly. "We're done here. Mr. Sullivan, you'll be hearing from the Justice Department regarding potential charges related to unauthorized access to classified materials and removal of government property." They left as a unit, briefcases snapping shut in synchronized bureaucratic anger. The door closed with a finality that felt like the last chance at easy money walking out of Garrett's life. Sheriff Ramsey whistled low. "Son, you just told the federal government to go to hell. That takes either incredible courage or incredible stupidity." "Probably both." Garrett's hands were shaking again. The enormity of what he'd just done was crashing down. Turned down $50 million to fight people with unlimited resources and political power. But they came in here acting like I'd stolen something instead of found something they lost. Like I should be grateful for their scraps instead of demanding what's legally mine. Ramsey nodded slowly. "You're going to need a lawyer, a really good one." "I don't have money for a lawyer." "Then you better find one who works on contingency, because those folks just declared war, and they play for keeps." Emma's voice cut through the heavy air. "There's a lady outside." "She says she's Walt's daughter, and she wants to talk to you." Through the window, Garrett saw a woman standing beside a sensible sedan. Early 60s, gray hair cut short, wearing a blazer and slacks that said lawyer before she opened her mouth. She caught his eye and raised a hand in acknowledgement. Ramsey grunted. "That'll be Vivian Bridger, best civil rights attorney in Nevada. Took on the mining companies in the 80s, won settlements that bankrupted 3 of them." "If she's here, things just got interesting." Garrett walked outside with Emma, leaving the safety of the sheriff's office for the parking lot where the lawyer waited. She was shorter than he'd expected, compact and contained like energy compressed into a smaller space. Her handshake was firm. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm Vivian Bridger, Walt's daughter, and I'd very much like to represent you in what's about to become the fight of your life." Vivian Bridger's office occupied the 3rd floor of a building in downtown Reno that had seen better decades. The carpet was worn thin in paths where countless clients had paced while their fates hung in balance. File cabinets lined the walls,
Physical archives, because Vivian didn't trust clouds or servers or anything that could be remotely accessed and deleted. She poured coffee from a pot that had been brewing too long, slid the cup across her desk to Garrett without asking if he wanted it. Emma sat in a chair too big for her, swinging her legs while pretending not to listen to adult conversation that would determine whether they ate next month. My father died believing he'd failed. Vivian's voice carried the weight of old grief, processed but not forgotten. Spent 54 years watching that vault, reporting it up the chain, getting told it was being handled. Near the end, he told me he should have gone public years ago, should have called the press, forced accountability. But he was terrified they'd prosecute him for theft, make an example out of the low-level grunt who wouldn't keep his mouth shut. She pulled out a folder thick enough to be a doorstop. Walt called me from the hospital last night. Told me what happened, what you found, what you told the feds. First words out of his mouth were, "Dad was right. You're the person who needs this more than they need to keep hiding it." Garrett wrapped his hands around the coffee cup for warmth, despite the room being perfectly temperate. I turned down $50 million. I might be the stupidest person you've ever met. Or the bravest. Vivian opened the folder, revealing page after page of legal precedent, property law, abandoned asset statutes. Federal abandoned property law is crystal clear. If the government sells land without disclosing what's on it, the contents belong to the purchaser. They'll argue national security, classified materials, strategic assets. None of it matters if they can't prove ongoing operational interest. Can they prove it? Not without admitting they lost track of it for 55 years, which creates bigger problems than just losing the gold. She spread documents across the desk. I've been researching since Walt called. Site Delta 9 was officially decommissioned in 1969. All paperwork says contents retrieved and relocated. If they now claim the gold was there all along, they're admitting to falsifying government records. That's a federal crime with no statute of limitations. Emma's small voice cut through the legal jargon. So they can't admit it exists, but they also can't let us keep it? Vivian smiled at her, genuine warmth for a child asking exactly the right question. Precisely. Which means they'll try every dirty trick in the book to make your father give up without forcing them to acknowledge the truth. What kind of tricks? IRS audits claiming tax liability on found property. Regulatory violations for disturbing a classified site. Criminal trespass charges even though he owns the land. They'll freeze your bank accounts, tie you up in legal proceedings for years, make it so expensive to fight that accepting a settlement becomes the only rational choice. Garrett felt the walls closing in. I can't afford years of legal battles. Which is why we don't play their game. We go public. Vivian's eyes gleamed with the particular satisfaction of someone who'd found the pressure point. We file suit in federal court, claiming ownership under abandoned property statutes. We leak everything to the press, the notebook, the photos, the maintenance logs showing 54 years of government negligence. We make this so public they can't make it disappear. Won't that just make them angrier? Absolutely. But anger makes people sloppy. And the court of public opinion matters when you're fighting institutions that rely on reputation. She pulled out her phone, showed him a news article from 3 years ago. Treasury Department admits losing track of $8 million in Iraqi reconstruction funds. They've done this before. Lost money, lost track of assets, covered it up until someone forced transparency. This is just bigger. Garrett scanned the article. Congressional hearings. Demands for accountability. Heads rolling in the bureaucracy. How long will this take? Optimistically, 18 months to get a judgment. More likely 2 to 3 years with appeals. 2 years. Emma would be 11, almost 12. They'd need somewhere to live, food to eat, a way to survive while lawyers argued over property rights and federal overreach. Vivian must have seen the calculation happening behind his eyes because she leaned forward, voice gentler than before. I work on contingency for cases like this.
No money up front. If we win, I take 20% of whatever you recover. If we lose, you owe me nothing. 20% of 600 million is a lot, yes, but it's also the only way you afford representation good enough to beat Treasury and the Federal Reserve and whoever else they throw at you. The math was brutal, but the logic was sound. Fight with professional help and maybe win something, or fight alone and definitely lose everything. Emma tugged Garrett's sleeve. What about school? If we're going to be in court and stuff, can I still go to school? The question gutted him. 9 years old, worrying about education continuity because she'd already learned that stability was a luxury they couldn't afford. Before he could answer, Vivian spoke. You'll stay in school. Same school if possible, different school if we need to relocate you for safety. But your education doesn't stop because adults are fighting over money. Safety? Emma's voice had gone small and tight. Vivian glanced at Garrett, a silent question about how much truth to share. He nodded fractionally. Emma deserved honesty about the danger she was in. The men who attacked Walt aren't going to stop. They work for powerful people who want that gold and don't care much about the law. We'll get you protection. Stay with Walt at his ranch where we can control access, or a safe house if necessary. Sheriff Ramsey's already agreed to increase patrols. Emma processed this with the stoic acceptance of someone who'd survived worse and knew she could survive this too. Okay, when do we start? The lawsuit was filed 3 days later. Sullivan versus United States Department of Treasury, Federal Court, District of Nevada. The filing made 10 pages of dense legal language that boiled down to one sentence. Garrett Sullivan owns the gold. Government abandoned it. Give it back. News broke within hours because Vivian had made sure it broke. CNN picked it up first. Man buys bunker for $1, finds $691 million in forgotten gold. Government wants it back. Then the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Fox News. Within 24 hours, Garrett's face was on every major network, the story too perfect to ignore. Single father, bought surplus property for $1, discovered the government had lost track of more money than most people could imagine. Public opinion crystallized fast. Social media exploded with hashtags. Hashtag forgotten gold. Hashtag David versus Goliath. Hashtag let him keep. Opinion pieces argued about property rights, government incompetence, what it meant that bureaucrats could misplace nearly $700 million while auditing regular citizens over a few thousand. The Treasury Department's response was predictably aggressive. Emergency motion to seal all records citing national security. Immediate freeze on the property pending investigation. Request for preliminary injunction preventing Garrett from accessing Site Delta 9 until ownership was legally determined. Vivian fought every motion, argued in hearings that anything classified had already been declassified by the government's own incompetence, that freezing the property was punitive action against someone who'd done nothing wrong, that the injunction was designed to make Garrett give up before the case was heard on merits. Judge Sarah Kimball, a Carter appointee in her 70s who'd made her reputation on forcing government transparency, denied most of the Treasury's requests. The records stayed public. The property stayed accessible, though under guard. The injunction was limited to preventing removal of the gold until ownership was settled. Garrett watched it all from Walt's ranch, effectively in hiding because the media had found his apartment and camped outside until the landlord threatened to call the police. Emma stayed with him, doing schoolwork via laptop because Vivian had arranged a temporary homeschool exemption. Walt recovered from his injuries with the grim satisfaction of someone who'd finally seen his father's work validated.
The old man showed Garrett the letters Randall had written over the decades.
Copies of reports filed with the Army Corps of Engineers, the Department of Defense, the Treasury Department itself. Each one documenting the vault, requesting guidance, asking what to do about the contents. Each one filed away and forgotten by bureaucrats who had more pressing concerns than one retired soldier's obsession with abandoned gold. Dad saved everything. Walt spread the letters across his kitchen table like evidence at trial. Knew someday it might matter. Knew they'd claim they never heard about it. Never knew. Couldn't have acted sooner. But here's 30 years of paper trail proving they knew and chose to do nothing. Garrett photographed each letter, uploaded them to 3 different cloud storage services under different accounts. Vivian made copies. Sheriff Ramsey kept copies in his evidence locker. The documentation metastasized into an archive too distributed to suppress. Then the first real blow landed. IRS. Notice of audit, delivered by certified mail. 3 years of tax returns under review. Penalties and interest potentially owed on unreported found property, valued at market rates. Estimated liability, $247 million. For gold Garrett didn't have and couldn't access. Vivian filed an emergency motion arguing the gold wasn't income until he took possession, which he legally couldn't do because of the court's injunction. Catch-22 designed to crush him financially before the case was heard. Judge Kimball granted a stay on the IRS action pending resolution of the ownership case. But the message was clear. Treasury had unlimited tools and zero qualms about using them. The second blow came 3 weeks later. Senator Preston Holloway's office released a statement. The situation in Nevada represents a troubling attempt by a private citizen to claim government property through legal technicalities. While we sympathize with Mr. Sullivan's financial circumstances, the federal government cannot allow strategic assets to be appropriated through loopholes in surplus property auctions. We are reviewing all options to ensure the integrity of classified material storage and retrieval protocols. Translation: we're coming after you with everything we've got. The statement triggered a new wave of coverage, this time more skeptical. Conservative outlets questioning whether Garrett had any right to the gold. Liberal outlets worried about the precedent of letting citizens claim government assets. Suddenly the narrative wasn't David versus Goliath. It was potential thief versus rightful owner. Emma watched the news coverage with the intensity of someone studying enemy tactics. They're changing the story, making you look bad instead of them. She was right. Garrett saw it happening in real time. Op-eds questioning his motives. Fox News panels debating whether he'd exploited a clerical error. Talk radio hosts calling him greedy for not accepting the $50 million settlement. Vivian came over that evening with a laptop and a plan. We need to counter narrative. Get you on camera telling your side. Not defensive, not apologetic, just honest. You're not trying to steal anything. You bought property legally, found something the government lost, and now they're trying to bully you into giving it back for pennies on the dollar. I'm not good on camera. You don't need to be good. You need to be real. She pulled up a contact list. 60 Minutes wants an interview. So does the Today Show. We turn down the big networks. Go with someone smaller who'll give you time to actually talk. PBS, maybe. Someone who does long-form journalism. They settled on a documentary filmmaker who'd made a career covering government overreach. He came to Walt's ranch with a small crew, set up in the living room, and let Garrett talk for 3 hours. About the eviction notice. About feeling like the system was designed to grind down people who were already struggling, while protecting those who'd never faced consequences for failure. The filmmaker wove in the photos from the vault, the maintenance logs, Walt's testimony about his father's 54 years of watching and waiting. Emma talking about how it felt to be 9 years old and learning that powerful people could change the rules whenever they wanted. The documentary aired 6 weeks into the lawsuit. Forgotten Gold: How the Government Lost $691 million and Tried to Hide It. 2 hours of careful journalism that made Treasury look incompetent at best, malicious at worst. Public opinion swung back. Hard. Congressional representatives started asking questions. How does this happen? What else have you lost? Who's accountable? Senator Holloway went quiet. Months bled into each other. Emma turned 10. Started middle school online because the media attention made regular attendance impossible. Developed a tough competence that broke Garrett's heart. Shouldn't have to be this resilient this young. Shouldn't know this much about legal strategy and media manipulation. Walt's health declined. The attack had done more damage than initially apparent. Cracked ribs that wouldn't heal right. Persistent pain that aged him faster than time alone could account for. But he stayed present, stayed involved, determined to see his father's vigil honored. Vivian worked 18-hour days, filed motion after motion, argued in court with the controlled fury of someone who'd spent a career watching powerful institutions crush regular people, and had finally found a case worth burning bridges over. The legal bills would have bankrupted Garrett 10 times over if she'd been billing hours instead of working on contingency. As it was, they survived on charity. Walt refusing rent, local restaurants donating meals, strangers sending money via GoFundMe, because the story had captured something primal about fairness and fighting back. 12 months in, Judge Kimball ordered mediation, forced both sides into a room with a federal mediator to see if settlement was possible before proceeding to trial. The session happened in a windowless conference room in the federal courthouse. Garrett and Vivian on one side, 4 government lawyers led by Constance Whitmore on the other. The mediator, a retired judge named Patricia Morrison, sat at the head, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. Whitmore opened with an offer. $150 million. Final. Take it, or we proceed to trial, where you'll spend the next 5 years in litigation before ultimately losing. Vivian didn't blink. Your initial offer was $50 million. What changed? The political calculus. Holloway's polling numbers dropped when he went after your client. Treasury doesn't want this in the news anymore, so we're willing to be generous. $150 million is generous? It's more than most people will see in 10 lifetimes. Garrett had been quiet until then, letting Vivian handle the tactical back and forth. But something in Whitmore's tone, the casual dismissal of his claim, the assumption he should be grateful for scraps, ignited the anger he'd been banking for months. You lost the gold. Not misplaced, not strategically positioned, lost. For 55 years. His voice stayed level, but the fury underneath was molten. And now you want me to thank you for returning 22% of what's legally mine? Whitmore's expression hardened. Mr. Sullivan, I suggest you consider the alternative. We have resources to litigate this until your grandchildren are old. We can make your life a special kind of hell. Audits, investigations, regulatory violations for every minor technicality. Is that really what you want for your daughter? Emma had been sitting quietly in the corner, nominally reading a book but obviously listening. She looked up now, met Whitmore's eyes with a directness that made the lawyer flinch. My dad taught me something. He said sometimes trying is enough even if you don't win. Because not trying means they were right about you being too small to matter. She went back to her book. We're not too small.
We just needed someone to remember we existed.
The room went very quiet. Patricia Morrison, the mediator, cleared her throat. Perhaps we take a break. Give everyone time to consider their positions. They reconvened an hour later. Vivian had used the time to make calls to allies in Congress, journalists following the case, advocacy groups monitoring government asset recovery, building pressure from outside the room. When they sat back down, Garrett spoke first. Here's what we'll accept. Full ownership of the gold legally recognized. Government provides security and logistics for safe retrieval and sale over 5 years to avoid market disruption. 30% goes to federal taxes, 15% to state and local. The remaining 55% stays with me to be distributed through a foundation I'll establish for working families in crisis. Whitmore started to object, but Morrison held up a hand. Let him finish. The foundation will provide direct financial assistance, rent, medical bills, car repairs, whatever keeps people from drowning in the gaps where government programs don't reach. No loans, no strings, just help, and no confidentiality agreement. The public gets to know what happened, how it happened, and what's being done to prevent it happening again. The government lawyers conferred in urgent whispers. Whitmore's jaw was tight enough to crack teeth, but something had shifted. Maybe the optics of fighting a single father who wanted to use most of the money to help others. Maybe the realization that winning in court might cost more in political capital than the gold was worth. Finally, Whitmore spoke. We'll need approval from Treasury and the Federal Reserve, and certain conditions, professional fund management, regular audits, oversight provisions. Agreed, as long as the oversight is transparent and the foundation maintains operational independence. More whispers, more calculations. Then Whitmore nodded once, sharp and final. We'll draft settlement terms and bring them back within 30 days. If both sides agree, we can end this without trial. They left the room separately, government lawyers first, looking like they'd swallowed something bitter. Garrett and Vivian waited, let the elevator carry the opposition away before moving. In the hallway, Vivian allowed herself a small smile. They're going to settle. They wouldn't have asked for 30 days if they weren't getting approval to close this. We won? We survived, which, against the federal government, is close enough to winning. Emma hugged Garrett hard enough to hurt his ribs. He held her and tried to believe this was real, that the months of fighting might actually end with something other than crushing defeat. The settlement took 8 weeks to finalize. Lawyers on both sides argued over language, definitions, oversight structures. But the core held. Garrett kept ownership. Government helped with logistics. 55% funded the foundation after taxes. Judge Kimball approved it with obvious satisfaction. Made pointed remarks about government accountability and the importance of transparency before signing the order that made everything official. The gold was moved over 6 months using armored transport and Federal Reserve security. Each bar documented, photographed, verified. Sold through official channels to avoid flooding the market. The money deposited into accounts managed by professional trustees with oversight from both Treasury and independent auditors. After federal and state taxes, Garrett netted approximately $380 million. He kept $5 million for himself, paid off every debt, bought a modest house in Reno. Nothing extravagant, just enough space and light and permanence. Set up college funds for Emma, put the rest in conservative investments that would generate enough income to live comfortably without touching principal. The remaining $375 million went into the Second Chance Foundation. He spent 3 months designing it with Vivian, Walt, and a team of nonprofit experts. The mission statement was simple.
direct financial assistance to working families in crisis.
No applications longer than 2 pages. No means testing beyond proof you were trying, had a job or were looking for one, had kids to feed, had expenses that exceeded income despite doing everything right. Medical debt paid. Eviction notices answered with rent checks. Car repairs funded. Student loans reduced. The gaps where government programs ended and desperation began, that's where Second Chance operated. The first grants went out 8 months after settlement. A single mother in Baltimore whose car had died and who couldn't get to work without it. $3,000 for repairs. A veteran in Portland with medical bills from cancer treatment he couldn't afford. $18,000 to clear the debt. A family in Phoenix facing eviction because hours had been cut. $2,000 for rent. Stories poured in. People who'd been holding on by fingernails suddenly had breathing room, could stabilize, could rebuild. The foundation processed hundreds of applications weekly, approved roughly 60%, distributed millions every month. Garrett hired carefully. Former social workers who understood poverty wasn't moral failure. Teachers who knew how to recognize genuine need. Veterans who'd been forgotten by the system they served. People who remembered what desperation felt like and wouldn't judge others for experiencing it. Walt joined the board despite his declining health, lived long enough to see the foundation help 10,000 families in its first year. Died peacefully at his ranch with Vivian and Garrett present, his last words about his father finally being vindicated. They scattered his ashes at Site Delta 9, which had been transformed into something new. The bunker became a museum, documenting Cold War preparedness, government accountability, and the cost of institutional forgetfulness. Randall Bridger's story, told in full. The soldier who'd kept faith for 54 years, with a promise no one else remembered. Emma grew, became 12, then 13. Started regular school again when the media attention finally faded. Joined robotics club. Talked about becoming an engineer. Carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd survived the worst and knew she could survive anything else. She helped at the foundation sometimes, read applications, talked to families who called desperate and afraid. Had a way of connecting because she remembered what it felt like. 2 years after settlement, Garrett was invited to testify before Congress about federal asset management. The hearing room was packed, cameras everywhere. Senator Holloway was notably absent, having declined to seek re-election after his role in the Novak arrangement became public. The committee chairman asked the question everyone wanted answered. Mr. Sullivan, what do you think the government should learn from this situation? Garrett thought about Randall Bridger's 54 years of lonely vigil, about Walt's determination to see his father honored, about Emma's resilience and the families helped and the systems that ground people down until they believed they didn't matter. That the things we forget are usually the things that matter most. Gold in a bunker, single mothers working double shifts, veterans who served and came home to nothing. People doing everything right in an economy that doesn't pay enough. He paused, let the words settle. The easiest thing in the world is to look away, to classify something as someone else's problem, to assume if people are struggling, they must not be trying hard enough. But the gold didn't save us. The chance to fight back did. The ability to prove that regular people deserve dignity and fairness, not just whatever scraps the system feels like throwing them. The committee room went silent. Then applause, scattered at first, then building until the chairman had to call for order. Garrett left Washington that afternoon, flew back to Nevada where Emma had a robotics competition and the foundation had 300 new applications to review,
and life continued in all its messy, complicated, ordinary glory.
The bunker stood empty now, transformed into a museum. Visitors walked through the vault where Randall had kept vigil, read his maintenance logs, learned about the cost of forgetting. But the real legacy wasn't in the museum or even the foundation. It was in the 50,000 families who'd received help when they needed it most. The single parents who'd avoided eviction, the veterans who'd gotten medical care, the workers who'd kept their cars running and their jobs intact because someone remembered they existed. The Second Chance Foundation's first grant had been $3,000 to repair a car. 50,000 more would follow in the years ahead. Each one a reminder. They mattered. They fought. They won. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to change what came after. Enough to prove that sometimes, not always, but sometimes enough to matter, David actually could beat Goliath. Not through luck, through refusing to believe that size determined worth, that power meant rightness, that being forgotten meant not mattering. Garrett Sullivan had bought an abandoned bunker for $1 and found more than gold. He'd found proof that regular people, when they stopped accepting scraps and started demanding fairness, could change the game entirely. The things we choose to remember define us more than the things we choose to forget. And they would remember this.